Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give it another couple minutes. Folks are still kind of coming in, so hang tight. We'll be starting shortly. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. EAB Task Force, September 13th. We are recording. Welcome, everybody. Our main goals today, hopefully everybody has a copy of the agenda that was sent out yesterday. If you did not receive it, shoot me an email, and I'll type my email in the chat right now. We're still kind of working out some kinks in the Microsoft Teams listserv. I know some folks have been able to get in, some folks are getting the emails, and I think we're still working on correcting some of the emails or adding folks who weren't added before. So if I have left you out, let me know, and we'll make sure to get you on there. So today we're doing kind of an update and then giving some time for our subcommittees to give some updates, as many of them have met in the last month or so. So I'm sure we'll have some good discussion around that. Other housekeeping items, we are still working on getting things up on the Oregon EAB.info website. We had initially started to post some of our video recordings from our previous task force meetings. So that will be kind of our public hub. We also have the Teams deal, which you will be able to find some of the meeting recordings and notes. And I know it gets a little wonky if you're also on the state teams, you have to kind of switch back and forth. So if folks have any issues, let me know. I'm still myself a Teams rookie, so if you have any points or advice, feel free to shoot those my way as well. Okay, I think we're going to kick it off to Chris Benneman from Rob.
Yeah, I think you've got chat and reactions muted on this.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I will figure out how to turn those on here very shortly while Chris and Wyatt talk. But Chris Benneman from ODA and Dr. Williams from ODF, give a little recap about where we're at.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. No problem on the figuring that out. I did notice that myself, so thank you, Robert, for pointing that out. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third task force meeting. I think I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm pretty sure that we have some new folks who have joined us since our last meeting, as we've all had conversations on our respective subcommittees and being reached out to by new persons who are interested. That's been part of the ongoing process, is making, like Patrick was saying, making sure everyone's getting on the listserv, updating our listserv as needed as we have new folks joining. So again, thank you for joining if you're new. So if you had a chance to check the agenda that was provided by Patrick, I think he sent that out yesterday. Today really is, the focus is really just to kind of hear from our subcommittees and see where we're at. But I did want to start off real quick just to recap an opportunity that ODF had presented with ODA to speak to their Board of Forestry. Don't need to get into the details about what we talked about unless Wyatt, you want to give a recap, but really it was just to reiterate where we're at, how we got here, what we know, what we don't know, emphasizing the actions that we've taken immediately. So a lot of those things are items that we've already covered in our previous meetings. But I just wanted to commend ODF on a great job, and also on the responsiveness of the board. So that was really what I just wanted to share with everyone, was the Board of Forestry was extremely supportive. For one, they give big kudos to everyone on the task force, all the various subcommittees, and are really impressed with the amount of work that we've done already in such a short amount of time. And they really just wanted to iterate their support to this effort. Just letting us know that they're there if we need them to kind of back us up in any way. So that was just heartening, I think, to hear from that. And Scott and Wyatt were both there at that meeting. So I don't know if either of you want to chime in with anything on that note.
I would just say that they, as with the wildfire situation, really stressed the importance, and we're grateful for the proactive approach and utilizing the best tools and technologies to deal with this threat. And in the same way that that approach has worked with wildfire defense or protection, it's serving us well with EAB efforts for just thinking ahead. And kudos to the team who 6+ years ago were putting these preparations together. So.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Chris, for coming and joining us. And for those of you who don't know, the Board of Forestry provides oversight and direction for the Oregon Department of Forestry. They are volunteer, appointed by the governor. And so they're pretty high level. They provide direction and approve policy. And so they had a lot of interest and questions. It was about 15 minutes of presentation and another 15 minutes. And a lot of the questions centered around private landowners and how to replant following ash destruction. So we have our work cut out for us at Oregon Department of Forestry, OSU, and some of the other partners on finding a replaceable tree species. And the other thing I want to say is ODA will have the quarantine authority, but then ODF has the rules in statute for harvesting ash. And so there are already some growers and some forest product companies out there interested in utilizing ash, and that will fall under our Oregon Department of Forestry laws for forest practices. But yeah, thanks again, Chris, for joining us that day.
I say, well, I give you kudos to you, Wyatt. You did a great job in presenting. So thank you for that. So unless there are any other questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item. I just wanted to update the group on that. So to say preemptively, well done. So next is just a recap. So again, purpose of today is just to hear updates from our various subcommittees. So just as a reminder, or again, if you are new, we previously created seven subcommittees ranging from various topics. So we have our surveying and monitoring group with the function of creating survey tools, making recommendations, facilitating data sharing of ongoing detections and trapping. We have our communications subcommittee with the task of creating our communications plan, sharing and delivering key messages, which are kind of helped created and identified by the task force as a group, our steering committee, or the other subcommittees. And that is kind of the key point between the information that we want to share with the media and the public or other interested groups. We have our research subcommittee. So for identifying and prioritizing research key questions and objectives. So like Wyatt just mentioned, this question on the kind of an ecological aspect of what are we going to do about replanting? What are the replantable species once we have ash no longer able to be in certain ecosystems? What are we going to do with that? That's definitely a question for the research group. Our wood waste and utilization for identifying, creating pathways of treatment, removal, disposal of infested and the suspect infested wood, seeking alternatives for said wood usage. Our IPM group for creating and addressing questions about how are we going to implement certain practices and kind of curating references and library resources that we can then share with our other interested parties or the public. Our training and tech assistance for implementing training and creating training opportunities for a wide range of audiences that we have interested in the ongoing EAB issue, and of course funding. So identifying funding sources for both government and for other entities. So if you have the agenda, again, that's kind of recapping what I just said, and we have identified a lead for each subcommittee. Their email is on that agenda. So if you're new, or if you didn't have a chance to before and you're interested in joining a subcommittee, again, I encourage you to reach out to one of the leads and volunteer for your time to participate in any of these ongoing initiatives. So that's all I had to say, just recapping all of that. And with that, I think we can go ahead and jump into our updates from our various subcommittees. So we were by request, we're gonna start with our survey and monitoring group, and the lead for that is Cody Holthouse with ODA.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's been a pretty productive last couple of weeks for the survey and detection subcommittee. I'll do my best to relay everything that's been worked on. There's a lot of different people involved, and I have several people that I've become familiar with, and you'll hear a lot about them today, but I hope that in future meetings, I'll get better at some of our local agency updates. We have a lot of different smaller agencies that are on the ground helping some of our larger agencies. And so I'll get better at highlighting you in the future. If you get left out today, I apologize, but we'll continue to grow that way. But I kind of wanted to break down some of our updates about what we have been doing and then what we're planning to be doing. So that's kind of the two breakdowns today. And then within each of those categories, I'm going to have kind of updates by program. And so I've got updates for my crew here at the Oregon Department of Ag. I'll have a few updates for those at Oregon Department of Forestry. And then my other major lead in my subcommittee is Robert Emanuel, working with Clean Water Services. And he's my liaison for many other people that are on the ground in Forest Grove area and some of the surrounding Washington County organizations. So yeah, and if I forget anything today, Robert or Wyatt or Christine or my other people, Max, Tom, let me know. But I think I'd like to start with Clean Water Services first because they've been doing a lot of the legwork for us. So what have they been up to? Like the others that I'll talk about today, we've all been using the Survey 123 app to go ahead and log data on ash trees that are in not only the Ground Zero Forest Grove area, but in some of the surrounding areas in Washington County as well. And that data is continuing to build, and I will go into the dashboard in a few minutes here and talk about that as well and more specifics. But Robert Emanuel is heading up this group and leading quite a few different people, not only in survey work, but in education as well, and securing permissions from many different property owners, and working with Jeff Merrill from Portland Metro, who is one of the chief scientists there that is granting us permission and access to some of the properties that Metro owns, along with several other property owners. Speaking of the training efforts that have gone on, there was a training effort on August 25th that Clean Water Services, as well as Oregon Department of Forestry, was able to participate in and put on, where they actually had 36 different organizations represented and a total of 40 individuals that were actually in participation on that date, which is really awesome. And a lot of people are being impacted by that kind of work. And it sounds like the target audience being industry leaders, arborists, people who are on the ground that actually are talking to the public on the day-to-day about what to do with ash trees that may or may not be afflicted with infestation, and how to plan for future infestation, how to survey. So a lot of first detector type training that's going on there. And I want to give a huge kudos to Robert Emanuel, Wyatt Williams, Christine Buell, others that have been helping put that training on. They also have another training that's coming up September 16, 1 to 4 p.m. at Joseph Gale Elementary Park, which is Ground Zero where we had first detection. And so that's something to reach out to us about if you have interest in. I don't know if Robert, if that's an open invitation, but at least if anyone has questions about how you're doing that training, I imagine you'd be able to relay them tips and tricks on what you're including in content, et cetera.
Well, actually, I'd love to refer him to both Alex and Brandy Safel. Brandy with the Tualatin Soil Water Conservation District, Randy Lawrence, my colleague, and Alex, who's been helping out on the OSU side. They've really been holding down the trainings, and the trainings are aimed particularly at professionals to get the initial survey data out there. These are folks who would be primed to use the Survey 123 instrument that Max developed. So versus the general public, Oregon Forest pest detector type audience, I know Alex has been doing more in that realm with woodland owners and arborists, et cetera. But what we're trying to do is focus on cities in the immediate Forest Grove region and folks that we work with frequently to manage wild ash habitat because they will be most likely to have the time and the knowledge and the motivation to do initial survey work. And Clean Water Services and Tualatin SWCD are paying them a little bit of extra project management money if they are an operator of some kind to do a wandering survey while they're out in the field. The idea is that we get these much more professionalized on the ground first, and to feed you, particularly, the ODA folks and the dashboard, the most high quality data we can in the immediate vicinity. But we are interested in getting the public and others involved, and any professionals on this call who want to come to that are absolutely welcome. There's no holds barred on it. I'll be there Friday as well. So, but a lot of credit I think needs to go to the Tualatin SWCD and to OSU in particular for organizing these trainings with everybody's help out there. So it's quite a full court press.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely second on those kudos there. Thank you for mentioning those other names, Robert. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us on that training. I know Tom Valente, who is also part of our subcommittee, has voiced interest in collaboration with the other committees that have anything to do with training and making sure we get supplies shared where it's needed. Tom Valente, again, is also creating some shadow box type materials that you could actually look at and see, chips or samples of bark that have galleries in them, larval instar kind of feeding patterns, things like that. So if you wanted to have any kind of teaching materials that are physical that you could use for any training, reach out to us on that as well. We might have some stuff for you. So yeah, and then we could go on and on. We have a few more items that I want to touch on with Clean Water Services, but we'll talk about that, I think, when we're talking about where we're going in next steps, planning for the future. That's what I think they've been up to in a large way in the past several weeks. Oregon Department of Forestry, like I said, has been kind of working in tandem there with some of their workshops and training efforts, as well as contributing more data to the Survey 123 app. And thank you very much to your team for doing that. As you'll see in a moment, we've got a lot more data coming in. And as far as the ODA, what we've been up to, we've also been cataloging using the Survey 123 app, getting more and more ash information out there. And we have a few new detection sites that we have found around Forest Grove, and I'll show you those in a moment. We've also been looking for potential biological control sites and locations. That's kind of a sub part of our committee. So there's also efforts into biocontrol. I won't get into that as much right now. It's kind of a can of worms. We've had other cities reach out to us, City of Eugene, Washington Parks Department, both have asked to use our Survey 123 app. So we have potentially some other people getting involved in that ash tree inventory as well. Yeah, that's a lot of what we've been up to. I know we've had people responding like Tom and Max to invasive species hotline notifications where we potentially have a site that might have exit holes or any other infestation signs in a tree. And we've been going and checking those listings quite regularly as well. As far as the APHIS crew that's a part of our group, USDA APHIS, they've been out in the Portland metro area as well as Forest Grove with traps and surveying efforts. I would say they have some of the wider scope in using the Survey 123 app, which is good. We're kind of getting an understanding of ash trees outside of Ground Zero, outside of Forest Grove. And they're inventorying those ash trees and also getting us potentially some trapping supplies for next year. We're working on ordering some supplies through them so that we're ready for next spring and possible efforts of trapping that go on. At this time, I wanted to show you a few updates on the dashboard. I don't know if you can see my screen there. I'm going to assume you can. So as of right now, you can see the Forest Grove area, and all these diamond-shaped little symbols are where we've had inspections go on looking at ash trees. Recently, Max Ragazzino, who's one of the entomologists on our crew, has updated some of the symbology here. And Max, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we've gotten rid of any green symbology to where now you can only see yellow, which is suspect, or red colors that indicate actual detections, positive detections of the insect. And as far as interesting news, it is an update.
Cody, could
can
you
see-
blow it up a little bit? Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
It's a little hard to see the screen. Thank you.
yeah. Joseph Gale Elementary is ground zero for us. You can see some of the red dots above it, 2 blocks to the north, in apartment complexes where we originally found some at Meadowlark Apartments as well. And as we zoom out, we're starting to get other positives showing up in the last month or so. I know Tom Valente and others went to Pacific University and found several infested trees at Pacific University. You can see here is not too far away from Joseph Gale Elementary. And then they also went down, Tom and crew, to Gales Creek. I'm not sure if I'm going to get the river name to show up there, but this little bend in Gales Creek is another site where on a natural stand of ash, they actually have an infestation. And you can actually see some pictures of some galleries that they are viewing in the branches there. So that's big news as well, as we get, natural stands kind of involved in this story. Another one to note is just north of some of the original ground zero initial infestation is Bard Park, where Jessica Rendon and Max Ragazzino also found some exit holes all over the trunk of a very mature Oregon ash there in Bard Park. So, fairly centralized still, but we are seeing new sites come up in natural stands of ash, and that one's a considerable distance here from Joseph Gale. So, yeah, I don't think it's quite as isolated as we thought 2 or 3 weeks ago, but that's some of the update there. And we have updated data coming in every day, so definitely reach out if you want access to this information. We can share this kind of dashboard with you on the regular. Yeah, let me bring my notes back up here. And as far as where we're going in the future, I know I'm running a little long here. I apologize. We have a lot of updates for you. Clean Water Services really wants to target the 1 mile radius around our ground zero. So more focused forest grove inspections. And I have a map here that I can actually show you that Robert provided me. Let me go ahead and share the map. If I can actually get it to do that.
If you need help, Cody, I can pull mine up too.
Thanks. I think I should be able to get it here. I just want to make sure the window is the right size. Yeah, okay, there we go. Great. I don't know if everyone has seen this PDF map. It says Wild Ash Surveys Focus Area. If you are, you can see that Robert Emanuel has kindly drawn a yellow highlighter kind of polygon around some of these areas that are going to really see a lot of intensive effort out of the Clean Water Services group and some of the other local groups on the ground that are working with Robert. You can see that they're working along riparian corridors along Gales Creek, the Tualatin River, and these include, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Robert, Penstemon Hill, Fern Hill, I think it's Gales Forest Grove Park, and then
yeah, so there's Penstemon Prairie, which is down in the southwest corner. In the north to the northeast, there is Fern Hill Wetlands, which is a clean water property. Many of these properties are owned by Metro, and I know Jeff Merrill's on the call. I don't know if Rob's on the call as well, but there's a lot of Metro, a lot of Clean Water Services public in here that's available for survey. And then Carpenter Creek, Gales Forest Grove, a property we call Zerker, which has a lot of wild ash on it, and then Maroon Ponds, and then some not listed here, but in some cases outlined, there are some working lands that are where permissions need to be managed by the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District that are adjacent riparian areas. But these are large, extensive ash populations directly adjacent to the infested area that we know about. Different age classed stands, high densities, lots of trees with different signs and symptoms, mostly of other forms of stress, but potentially EAB as well. And this area really gives us kind of a good snapshot of wild ash populations in the immediate vicinity. There's also ash populations, obviously, to the north of Forest Grove and to those red. I just outlined a couple of major points from survey recently to show you the kind of the area that would be both in and outside of that survey zone. But to the north, you also have Council Creek and some creeks flowing into there, which will also eventually become part of the survey zone. But just wanted to give you a sense. These are areas where there's multiple opportunities for easy access, for multiple types of survey, including dropping a tree or taking upper limbs in the crown, and for eventually doing EAB biocontrol releases as well. And Cody, I just want to let you know you had a question too. Somebody's got their hand up.
Okay, yeah, feel free to voice that question, whoever that is.
It's me, it's Karen Ripley. I just wonder,
Karen.
I think the time has come that the trap should have been collected. Is there data on the different trapping efforts that you can report?
That's a good question. I'd have to probably defer you to Mariah, who's had the most of the traps out. I don't know. We talked about traps and ordering new traps last week, but I may be missing out on any data reported from those yet.
No EAB have been found in any of the traps.
Thanks, Mariah.
Thank you.
Awesome. So there's a little bit more intricacy on some of that more targeted area where Clean Water Services and other sister groups are going to be working, again, within that more 1 mile buffer around ground zero. Tyler Peterson, who is working on the invasive species coordinator for Tualatin Soil Water Conservation Group, will also be doing possibly a look at a 2 mile radius and some efforts there as well. Tyler Peterson, like I mentioned, and Laura Trunk are both intricately involved in some of these survey projects that are going forward, as well as, I believe, I'm blanking on the name here. It was, I think, Bethany. I am so bad with names. I apologize. Hopefully next time I'll have more of those listed for you. But again, a lot of people involved with Robert's efforts there, and we're working forward on more of that survey effort in the local area. And yeah, I think I'm gonna skip on to, there was a note here that, sorry, Robert, what was that?
Bethany Lund, Cody. She's with the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Bethany Lund, appreciate that. I did have an interesting note here from Robert that he has been in the works. I don't know if he's already passed these out, but he's in the process of creating and disseminating permission slips that are given to landowners that talk about what involvement they want to have in the project and what potentially would go on if they were involved in our surveys and other efforts. And so if you are interacting with private property landowners, I encourage you to reach out to us on that topic as well. I think Robert could lend a hand on any messages that need to be created there. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
I'm just going to refer folks to Tyler. Tyler Pedersen is handling those on behalf of the Soil and Water Conservation District. They have the local landowner relationships and permits of entry for a lot of those community members and want to manage the permissions and access.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, and then as far as what's being planned on the ODA side, we will continue to do our surveying and responses to hotline reports and things like that. I will let Jake go on more detail on this. I don't know if Jake, you want to do this now or later, but we are planning to do an in-house training for ODA staff that will be facilitated by APHIS USDA later in the month to act as kind of a reinforcement of site selection and tree sampling and other field related skills led by several different leaders within the USDA APHIS crew.
Yeah, so Cody summarized that. We're going to have 2 trainings, one in the fall, which will be in a couple weeks, next week or so, 2 weeks, and then one in the spring, which will be a larger scope. So the one in the spring will be trying to pull in Washington and California and give a much larger training on that to cooperators. But the one occurring in 2 weeks, as Cody mentioned, is going to be much smaller for everybody to get their bearings on how this is going to work. What we talk through when people are out in the field of what they're looking at and kind of what the tree is telling us as we scout through that, as well as through land ownership, permissions, scraping trees, and going through all those steps for biocontrol. So this is more of our first run through it, and then we'll be opening it up in the spring for a larger audience.
Yeah, and I think that will be very insightful. I'm excited to get our people on the ground later this month to work with those from APHIS. It'll be interesting as we do possibly some sampling of branches and other trunk samples. We'll probably learn more about some of these natural riparian stands as well ourselves. So yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah, and as far as on the ground work, we kind of have twofold plans. We're hoping that potentially a smaller crew of some of our seasonal trappers may be able to stay on at the end of this season and work with some of the leadership from our Japanese beetle eradication team on potentially just looking at visual surveys of ash during the winter to get a better idea of some of the extent, again, of the infestation levels on some of our natural riparian ash stands. And so that's still in the works. And as well as plans for a spring effort to actually set up trapping delimitation. I need to work with Carrie on ordering some traps from Mariah and the APHIS crew, but we're hoping to potentially do an actual group of emerald ash borer trappers that would go out next spring. Again, that's in the works, but something that we'd like to do given funding availability and other things like that. So we talked a little bit about that as a committee as well. And I know that Mariah has generously offered support via personnel and other supplies to that effort in the spring as well. And if that's something that you feel like you had a group of people that might be interested in that this spring, please reach out to us on that as well. Yeah, I think that's a lot of that. Again, I talked about the idea that Tom is creating teaching materials, so reach out to us for that. I don't have as much here in the way of Oregon Department of Forestry as far as what they have planned in the next few weeks, but from what I understand, they've been very involved with surveying continuously for ash, like we have, and supporting a lot of these training efforts. And if Christine is here and has any other updates, or Wyatt, you feel free to interject those now. But I think that's a large part of what we've been working on as the subcommittee, and I can stop talking now. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Cody. And just a quick tech update. I've gone through just about every option and setting and 3-dot menu there is, and I'm not finding anything about the chat. So I'm going to keep looking, but it looks like the reactions are up. I've seen some people raise hands, so let's use that for now. Are folks seeing the Q&A deal at all? Maybe we can use that if folks want questions on the side. So I'll keep looking into it, but thanks for your patience.
Patrick,
okay.
For the Teams chat, that's something that I don't think you can change once the meeting has begun. I think that needs to happen before the meeting's hosted.
Perfect. Thank you, Doctor. I will make sure it's up for the next one. Or it looks like some people are able to see chat. So anyways, next up, we have the Communications Committee. Jim.
Thanks. So
For that, I'm gonna sorry,
oh, go
Wyatt,
ahead,
did you have
Chris.
something you wanted to say?
Yeah, Wyatt.
No,
I just wanted to say, yeah, for a survey, thanks, Cody. ODF does have a handful of traps up in the area. Those will be checked before the end of September. And we'll report back on that. And then just wanted to say thanks for the survey tool and for future trapping too for next year. We have a bare bones organization for trappers compared to ODA, and we're still defaulting as ODA as the lead agency on this. So my opinion is that we can help fill in the gaps. If you know areas where you might need some assistance, we have some plans too to hire or have some funds shifted to other positions to help out. So just keep that in mind that ODF is here to fill in the gaps for trapping next year.
Great. That's excellent. Thank you, Wyatt.
Okay, sorry, Jim, go ahead, go for it.
that's all right.
Communications.
Yes, communication. So been spending a lot of the last few weeks trying to identify liaisons to the communications subgroup from the different agencies so that they have a person who can help vet stuff and bring forward information, somewhat like what we're hearing today. The meeting, the next meeting of that group is the 19th, where I want to present what I've received from the overall communication plan. We've sent that out to the liaisons in that group that have been identified to date. Didn't get a lot of response, but there were, a few tweaks to that. Probably the biggest one was whether we wanted to have a list of resource links in the communication plan itself, which we could, but we need to know sort of what are the links that people are validating as, yeah, this is a good link to have on there. So once we meet on the 19th, what I'd like to do is sort of say, is everybody happy with the communication plan? Can we now send it out to the broader group and say, this is basically the blueprint for how we are planning to move forward, a living document. So if when that broader group receives it and they think, hey, I just noticed, or we've got this, or what about that? It's not too late to let us know and we can make adjustments and take them back into the committee, weigh those and see if there's any reason not to make those changes. But so that should be coming following week. The other items that we created were an audience map for use by the agencies to be able to say who's reaching out to arborists, who's reaching out to urban forestry professionals within municipalities, who's reaching out to homeowners in various locations. And so who's reaching out to the nursery industry. So it might say, for example, well, nursery owners, that's going to be ODA as the primary communicator. In some cases, like landowners, well, there's a number of people that might be reaching out to them, depending on whether they have a natural area or they're just a homeowner with some stuff. So as anyone sees that map and says, well, I'm going to be communicating to this audience, we want to track what was that communication in this spreadsheet so that we can kind of know, oh, ODA is reaching out to them for, in this occasion, ODF is reaching out on a totally different matter, but still talking about EAB matters, so that we can kind of say, well, gee, these people are getting, are they getting 4, 5, 6 communications from, 7 different agencies, or is there a way that maybe we should be consolidating some of that so they're getting it in a combined communication? So it's not just, here, look out for this, and then the next thing they know is, hey, if you're going to harvest timber, here's a whole other sheet of paper. Can we sort of think about our audiences and think, well, what is it that they need to know about EAB, regardless of sort of which agency maybe thinks they should know that, if possible. So that's the purpose of having that kind of a map. And then also to know, gee, nobody's communicated to this one group. That it doesn't seem like any agency is communicating to them. So we want to sometimes highlight that and say, well, has anybody thought about this group? Is there a communication plan for them? The other thing is a timeline, and listening to this has been kind of interesting because in a communications mindset, the last communication the public really had in a general sense was the bugs are flying, report them if they look like this, report them, it's a green insect, and we were interested in that. And if you see ash declining, report that. Well, they're still getting reports, we understand, of insects being reported when in fact emerald ash borer adults are no longer flying. So it seems like the natural communication point now is to update people to say, you don't have to worry about reporting green insects because they're not going to be adult emerald ash borers. If they're flying around right now, they're not emerald ash borers. So, however, if your ash are still decline, if you see declines, that would be an occasion to report that, and we may come out, have people look at it. If you can do the self-reporting, that's great. Or we have, as you were just saying, Cody, there are people that can come out and look at suspected trees if they get reported. So we are thinking the fire communication took up most of the oxygen in the room. So we kind of waiting for that to die down. But I think the time here in the last part of September is good to have another communication generally to the broader community saying the following. Thanks for people reporting earlier this summer. Now is the time of year when the emerald ash borer adults are gone. Everything is really happening inside the trees over the winter. The good news is that natural spread by insects flying of emerald ash borer is not happening over the winter. So we have a little bit of time. The real risk for spread now is really going to be human-caused moving firewood. So the insects themselves are pretty much in place for winter. Now I want the entomologists on this call to verify that what I'm saying is accurate. But by and large, the concern in fall and winter, after the adults are not flying around anymore, is movement of the wood. And that's how the larvae are going to get around to other locations to emerge in the spring. So that would allow us to bring in the message about, so don't report adults, do report ash, the trees that are declining, and don't move firewood, kind of the three key messages. And then get ready and get trained, because in the spring, that's when we will again see the emergence of these insects. So we think a communication now in the fall would kind of reassure people that, hey, we haven't forgot about this. There are people working on it. And we can then list, and I was making some notes there, Cody, with some of this stuff, is over the winter, we want to sort of say, bulleted form, there will be trainings, a variety of trainings this fall and this spring for arborists and other interested professionals who work with trees to help them learn how to identify this. And so contact the EAB information page, which brings me to my next point is we have worked, Patrick, feel free to weigh in here, but OISC, it was suggested the Oregon Invasive Species Council could be host to a EAB information general web page about everything related to web page for the general public to go to and find past news releases. They could find these training sessions if they're open to the public and you want people to attend. They could find the fact sheets. They could find any videos that people put out or some of the existing videos. They would find the emerald ash borer lookalikes and those kinds of tools and resources. So tools, resources, background information, news releases, etc. And it would all be under an EAB website with one URL that anybody in any agency could give out. It doesn't preclude ODA or ODF having their own webpage and their own information there, because some people will think to go to ODA as a lead agency. Others might be more familiar with ODF and they're going to go there. But if for people who are not, like, I don't know who to contact, here's www.oregoneab.info. And they'll get there and it'll come up, and it won't be, I have to search down through 3 or 4 other topics before I get to the EAB section. It'll be coming up directly with, here's your EAB information. And we would ask people as they have updates to that information to let us know. And the idea would be that the OISC webmaster would then take that and keep that current as people flow that information, so that the communications working group could kind of, serve to say, okay, we've got the fact sheet. Does people want to make changes? How does, is everybody agreed those are the right changes? Then we can say, yep, this is approved. And then boom, the webmaster says, great, we got it updated. So that the flow of information is kind of from your technical and scientific and research committees. The communications committee then sort of gets that and sort of packages it. And then OISC publishes it on their web page as appropriate. And that way, if anybody's like, well, where do I go to get more information? you can just direct them to that one website and it won't change whether it's fall or spring or summer. Doesn't matter who put out the release, it'll be up there. So whether it's an ODA release or an ODF or a joint release, it would be essentially housed. A couple of things on the, let's talk about like what would unfold as communications. We talked about September with that sort of catching people up with where we are now and what are the messages for the next several months included in that. I think at the point at which ODA designates a quarantine zone, that's going to be a public interest. Hasn't happened yet. And Chris, I don't know if you have any sense of that, or Cody, but when that happens, I think that would probably be a prompt for us to generate some kind of announcement that says, you know, this portion of Washington County is now in a quarantine. What does that mean? Who does it affect? What do you need to know if you're in the zone or traveling through it, or any of those things? So that could be a discrete communication, probably accompanied by a map of where the outline of that quarantine zone is. Maybe issued by ODA, but I think again posted on OISC, and hopefully other agencies would also, you know, link to that. And then I'm hearing a lot about the spring, and I think we should be planning on sometime whenever, you know, the entomologists tell us that, okay, the bugs typically will emerge, I don't know, 1st of April, 20th of March, whatever, ahead of that, that's when we put out we're expecting the emergence of these insects. You might start to see them flying around. So here's kind of our spring message is, if we want people to really be observant and alert and trying to report those, how do you do that? Get the lookalike things refreshed for people. If there's any other trainings that are for the general public, or if there's online resources or videos they can do, so that we get that awareness out there. That would also be a time for us to say, well, we've been busy over the winter. You know, we've trained 150 people. We could give kind of here's what happened over the winter while you weren't paying attention. Now that maybe EAB is going to be a little more, you know, prevalent in your mind or top of mind, know that we have been working, know there, let's say, is a quarantine zone in effect, remind people about the don't move firewood, and then give them that sort of, yes, here's the spring EAB. There is a annual urban forestry conference that the Oregon Community Trees puts on in Portland in June. And this Friday, they're going to meet to decide if they want to focus that around emerald ash borer, in which case that reaches around 100 different people in municipal forestry and utility arborists and others. So a good audience for us to really dive deep into that. So we may be reaching out to the different agencies to get panelists and others, and potentially could even record some of those sessions, and then those could be posted, because they are designed, although they're kind of designed on a more specific level, their audiences generally have a lot of good questions. It still is of interest for people that couldn't make it in person to have those. So we may be reaching out to different people to talk about issues around, because it's a 6 or 8 hour, yeah, it's about 6 or 7 hours. There's time in there to talk about wood waste utilization, the impacts on, you know, what about the natural areas. So Rob's familiar with that conference. So we're thinking some panel discussions and some other things. So more to come on that, but wanted to just kind of put that on people's calendars. It's usually held up at the World Forestry Center, and I think that's where it'll be again this year.
Jim,
Register Guard did it.
End?
Pardon, Rob?
Go ahead.
Oh, I
You
was
had a
just going to
question?
say, Jim, I assume you're going to tap into a bunch of task force members for speakers. You kind of got your ready-made speaker group right here.
Well, I have to clear this by the Education Conference Committee for Oregon Community Trees, and
Yeah.
then they will start the process of outreaching. But yes, many of the people in this call will probably get tapped to do that.
Yeah.
So that's why I was kind of alerting people that don't be surprised if you get asked to be, you know, a speaker or be on a panel. The other Eugene Register Guard, their reporter Adam Duvernay has kind of been interested in EAB and was kind of wanting to know about this seed collecting project, if that was coming toward the end. And so I had talked to him about it, and he got more interested, watched the video online, and interviewed Wyatt Williams today, and is planning to interview Richard Sinesco, if he hasn't already, about what is going to happen with the million or so ash seeds of Oregon ash that were collected under the federal grant and are going to be planted out and tested, at least a portion of those. And so that's a very long range. That's not something you need, anybody is kind of immediately going to take action on, but long range, it's over the next 20 years, potentially where we find that there might be pockets or reservoirs of genetic resistance that could be utilized to bring Oregon ash back. So I think when we talk to the community, we want to let them know there's this kind of immediate, the crisis of it kind of coming out into the, arriving in Oregon, spreading out, infecting trees in various communities. That will kind of roll out as that happens in the next few years. Longer term, though, there was long range thinking, thanks to the partnership with the federal government, to try and preserve this gene pool and then test for resistance. So we're taking both what are the short-term actions that need to be done? Let's find it, find out where it is, find out how fast it's spreading. Then let's sort of make sure communities are prepared, and we'll continue to hit that message in the appropriate venues. Let's make sure people are trained to know how to identify it, and then they know what to do with it when it is there. And then longer term, are we working on anything to try and deal with that? And I would put in that bucket some of the biological controls that APHIS is doing. So if there's going to be a release of biological controls in Washington County, with Jake and others on there, we would love to know that on the communications committee, because we think we can probably promote that with some, say, television stations going out as you release those in the wild. That's a visual opportunity. And I think it shows people that, hey, stuff is being done here. We're not just throwing up our hands and letting it go. We're trying these parasitic wasps and things, not necessarily to eradicate, but to try and slow the spread, or whatever the appropriate words are there. So those kinds of things we'd like to know in advance, so we can plan that in our communications plan to say, okay, here's a media opportunity. Who should we invite? Where's it going to be? Is it just the Portland area media? Is there an OPB maybe would be interested in that as well? So we can kind of coordinate with the agency that's doing the work, with the landowners, or where that place is, so we can get permissions, and then maybe have people go out and accompany it, kind of like a Oregon Field Guide doing this science, the state and federal and local governments cooperating in this kind of pest science, as it were. So that's a lot in a short time. So sorry to sort of go on, but those are our thoughts at this point. So got a question from Rob, it looks like.
Yeah, quick question for your long range too. Don't forget to put in there about replacement strategies, ecological management strategies, especially wild ash populations, but I'm thinking also your cultivated street trees, park trees, things like that. But I know that's
I think
more
there's
you and Scott, but
no. I mean, though Scott and I have had those conversations, and you're absolutely right. I think the response comes down to there's what do you do with the removal, and then there's also now what do you put in there. I know that's been a big issue for you folks, and I know there's been some technical discussions about what are the appropriate species to replant with. Is it, and what is the mix, and does it depend on site, and can you do it, is 60% of the replacements can be this, or do we want to mix it up even more because of the concern about, just replacing one monoculture with another? We're going to need the technical people to come to agreement about that, if possible, or a consensus, because before we start saying, oh, you should plant this, we want to make sure that there is agreement in the botanical and riparian restoration communities that, yeah, those would be appropriate. If a town wanted to do that, they would be within the realm of agreed appropriateness.
We're working on that. We started a group already between the two local partners that are kind of leading the Soil Water Conservation District and Clean Water Services. My colleague Jeff on the call here too. I plan to involve him. He knows that's coming, I hope. And there's others out there. I assume we're probably going to be touching base with folks at like Dan and Alex and others in the OSU realm too. So that's already started. And I think the key ingredient here is to talk, if we're going to be talking to the public, and it feels very doom and gloom, like one possibility is to talk about resilience. What is resilience in a forest ecosystem? What kinds of crisis and opportunities do you have?
Yeah, I mean, this is disturbance, and forests have experienced other kinds of disturbances.
Tree
Right, I mean, you have to-
selections for urban landscapes too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Floods can take out an area, and sometimes you can replace with what was there before, and other times maybe it's too wet to put, what was there before. So yeah, that's a good thought. And Alex from OSU.
Yeah, I hate to be that guy, but I just want to remind everyone now we're down to like 5 minutes for the remaining subcommittees. And we still got like 4 to go, 5 to go. So just wanted to throw
Yeah,
that
I'm
out.
done. I'm done. There just hands went up.
Okay, I think that's right. Thank you, Alex, for that prompt. Definitely don't want to cut anybody out, but we also do want to be respectful of everyone's time and try to keep to our agenda as much as possible. So with that, I think if there's anyone, maybe this was a connected topic, if there's anyone from the research committee that would like to provide an update, and then we can move forward. I know that Dave Shaw was kind of acted as our lead, but he is unavailable. I know he's off in Alaska, I think, right now. But I'm not sure if he nominated anyone else to speak up on his behalf, or otherwise, if not, we can move on to the wood waste and utilization group.
I think Alex will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we, or maybe Wyatt, I don't think that we had a designated speaker for the research subcommittee, as far as I know. And also correct me if I'm wrong, the most that we've had is David sent out a document to all of us with some preliminary research ideas that we've had the opportunity to edit. It's been uploaded into the team site, which thank Patrick for getting that all set up. And I've been going in and putting some comments and edits in there, and I think we're still in that process, and we'll be convening upon Dave's return.
That sounds good. Thank you, Thomas. And of course, research doesn't happen overnight. So I didn't expect that you were going to come to the table with all the solutions.
Also, just want to add, Dave will be back next week. So I'm sure once he gets back, research subcommittee can hit the ground running.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Okay, with that, I think we can move on to our next subcommittee. So wood waste utilization. Is that you, Wyatt?
Yeah, that's me. Hi, Wyatt Williams, ODF. And I just want to say thanks. It's amazing to see all the people working behind the scenes with a lot of passion, a lot of time. And I know that you're getting a ton of pressure from your constituents and your clients. And it's just amazing to be sitting here seeing all this come together. So we did have a meeting for the wood waste and wood, oops, I'm sharing the wood waste wood utilization on August 23rd. And I want to thank everyone who joined. I think there's 17 people that joined. Again, a lot of passionate people, a lot of really good ideas. And I just want to kind of, since we're short on time, we did lay out some really good guidelines because there's a lot of published information out there. We didn't have to recreate the wheel, but I've already heard this mentioned today on the call that there's essentially an active period where the adults are flying. So about April 1st through September 30th. That varied a little bit, but this was the consensus among all the materials that the team reviewed. So this is active period. This is just general guidelines. This doesn't have anything to do with quarantines per se, but that's when you should avoid removing ash at that time, or if you do have to remove it, then to chip it is the best way, or to get it covered and process it at a safe facility. And then there's this dormant period, which we're about ready to approach right now, October 1st through March 31st. And that's when you can work on ash in a safe manner and transport it. And then there's some approved treatment options right here. And again, this is a synthesis of several different standards that we reviewed, and that is processing the wood to create bark free and removing the sapwood and this is where there's some conflict, but 1 inch would be the best So remove the bark and 1 inch of the sapwood. Grinding or chipping to 1 inch in any 2 dimensions. Heat treatment at 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees for 60 minutes. Incineration, that's air curtain and open burning. Burial, at least 12 inches of topsoil. I guess emerald ash borer can crawl through 11 inches of topsoil, so make sure it's 12 inches. Composting, again, 140 degrees for 4 days. And then secondary processing to produce wood products such as paper, fiberboard, wood pellets. And so I sent this to Chris and to Patrick too, so we don't have to go through all the nuts and bolts, but if someone wants to move ash material out of the quarantine area, what other states have done is set up a compliance agreement with regulatory agencies. And so, again, this is all spelled out. We didn't have to redo the wheel here. But the material, again, there's that safe period when they can move out of the quarantine, and then they have to be processed. I don't really want to go into all this right here because I want to cut to the chase down here. Utilization options for ash wood. These are things that we've all discussed and probably thought about, but the products can be lumber, wood chips, boiler fuel, firewood, and then other non-traditional products such as biochar, wood pellets. And we go through and list how should those products be treated. So lumber should be kiln dried, or if it's kiln dried and square edged, then it's exempt from regulations. Green lumber can only leave the quarantine under compliance agreement. Wood chips, again, it's the 1 inch by 1 inch. Already talked about heat treatment. Disposal options, so that's for making products for disposal. The options are disposal in landfill, an air curtain incinerator, and open burning. And I included in my package to ODA and to Patrick some of the references, but there were more. We reviewed maybe 6 or 7 different references there. And the best one by far was the one from Canada. So unlike the US, Canada still has a nationwide regulation program for EAB. And so this is the most up-to-date that I could find, comprehensive best management practices for slowing the spread or preventing the spread of emerald ash borer is this Canadian reference there. But getting down to the specifics, thanks a lot for the local folks such as Ann here from Washington County. I know she's on the call. She mentioned that Washington County does deal with wood waste already. So they can process 20 cubic yards of wood waste over 40 weeks. So 800 cubic yards of wood products produced every year and reused. And there are additional locations where the county can use more wood chips right now. We don't have a volume estimate, but so they're reusing it to prevent erosion and along like streams and stuff like that. So Ann has a list of the county-owned wood chippers and related machinery. She has a list of storage facilities, and Washington County belongs to this database with neighboring counties, and they can actually share equipment. So Ann has that, and she's preparing that. People on the phone call also identified local providers for chipping, collecting, and hauling materials, and here are some of those entities right there. We gathered the yard debris drop-off centers, the garbage transfer centers. There is curbside garbage pickup that Washington County does have, but we don't have the list of companies yet. But here's a website that kind of points us in the right direction. And then, there's some other potential leads for staging areas or wood waste haulers. And there's 2 lumber mills close to Forest Grove. Stimson is the big one, and it's right outside Hag Lake, outside Gaston. And then Hampton Lumber Mill is a little bit smaller. It's just north of Forest Grove at Banks. But both of these entities, we did not call them, but they might have additional information on contractors or how to haul or temporary storage locations. So who can use the wood chips? Like I said, Washington County has a program, and they can still have a need for chips within Washington County. And then Bob Barrows mentioned that ODA Confined Animal Feeding Operations Manager Wim Matthews might know about dairies in the area that could use wood chips for bedding. And again, thanks to Bob. Barrows at DEQ because he pulled out these resources right here. So there are DEQ permitted facilities in the Forest Grove area for composting, and Bob believes that they can meet that requirement for sterilizing wood products and bark and wood chips. So here's two just in the area. And same for DEQ permitted air curtain incinerator. There's a couple again in the Portland Metro Forest Grove area. Chris from Metro mentioned that there's some lessons learned from Japanese beetle eradication. So for that project, contaminated material is collected and hauled to a central location, and then it's buried at Hillsborough landfill. And so Chris and I are meeting later today to talk about that specifics. And then there's some interesting products that might be able to be used for all the ash that might be killed, and that is wood like wood pellets or firewood. So with that, that is the end of the report. Let's see if there's any questions here.
Like Nick.
Someone has a
Nick from Portland.
Hi, Wyatt. Thanks. That was great. Lots of really good information. I'm not sure if it's in draft form. When will that information be finalized, or can you share it with the group? That's my first question. And my second question is, when are you touched upon quarantines? What are the thresholds that will make a quarantine occur? And I guess I'm surprised it has not already been enacted for Forest Grove. So 2 questions there for you.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I'll speak to that. First of all, thanks, Wyatt. Nick, great question. There aren't really thresholds that inactivate a quarantine. It's really as the regulatory agency finds a condition that warrants placing or enacting quarantines and determining what those parameters are. So it's, I don't really know exactly what you meant by thresholds, but either way, just having an invasive pest is a trigger to enable a quarantine. Typically, we talk about emergency quarantine just because of the rulemaking process is a lot faster to implement something. It also doesn't make the rule permanent, because once a rule is permanent, it is forever there. And if you want to modify that quarantine, it's a lot more red tape to do that. So that's why we usually start with an emergency quarantine, which is about 180 days. Going as to why it hasn't been put in place yet, we've been working on that, just for various internal reasons. That's just taken longer. Part of that is that our acting rules advisory person has been on leave for emergency leave, so that's kind of put a blockade in that. Either way, I do have those paperworks ready for submission. So once those are screened and approved by our agency, then that goes through for final processing. But we don't need to have public hearing comments, rule advisory committees that are some of the other extra steps that would typically take place when we're doing a permanent rulemaking process. So hopefully that answers your question, Nick.
Yes, thank you.
I can chime in too, Nick. When do they become final? When can we release some of these best management practices? Well, some of them I can release to you right now, like how to best manage the material and the timing. But I really want to wait until we have another wood waste and wood utilization subcommittee meeting, 1 or 2 of them, because we have some loose ends there, like getting a list of contractors and equipment and storage facilities. I still want to tie up some loose ends, but then the big piece is getting approval from ODA, because there's some information in there about compliance agreements. And so that's going to take a regulatory agency. Maybe ODA doesn't like that, or maybe they want to tweak it, or maybe it's a mutual compliance agreement process between ODA and ODF or the county. So that type of stuff is not close to being final, but the best management practices for reducing the risk of moving emerald ash borer, that's pretty well understood. So that's what we can call it, is best management practices. So I can send you like a snapshot of that if you want.
Yeah. So I would maybe recommend that. I totally agree with that process, Wyatt, and I get folks out there who are listening. You want this information out already, but we need to make sure that we do it right and that we're all in consensus of what we're doing. Because if you take that care now, it avoids confusion and miscommunication happening down the line. So yeah, you're right. The wood waste utilization, you guys are the subject matter experts developing the guidelines. So then that was going to be my question is, what is the next appropriate avenue to disseminate this information? Is it handing it to the BMP group to develop a kind of document that we can then publicly share that has that information? Or is that something that the communications group can tackle? Because I mean, at that point, we're just talking about formatting, right? Just putting it in something and then getting the information out there.
I think we're happy to format it once there's consensus, as we were talking about, and having then, because then it can get posted, it can be used as a download for people that want to print it out for their local use, etc., like that. So it creates it in a format that seems to work for the most audiences.
Hi, Chris. Welcome.
Hi, thanks.
I thought you had something to say.
No, I was next in the thing, and you bring up just the point that I was going to make. I could give a report about everything we went over, but one of the biggest questions we came up with was, what is our role as the IPM BMP subcommittee? We've been approaching this, Karen and I have been meeting regularly for each 2 weeks. Maybe I'll just jump into my report, but if people have more questions about that, feel free to stop me. Our approach, we've been meeting basically weekly every 2 weeks to review resources that we're finding throughout the country of other states that have dealt with this, and sort of identifying the various audiences within the Northwest. We've been looking at which questions we have specifically and which questions we can't answer directly, and might be different for our state, such as susceptibility or pesticides that can be used. And we found great examples, but it sounds like everyone's finding great examples. And so we've been vetting our stuff and meeting with other states as well, but it sounds like everyone else has been doing that also for their specific groups. The only thing I haven't heard addressed mostly is like pesticides and how to apply them and which ones to use, which Alex Gorman, who's on our subcommittee currently, has already, for the most part, written up and put in the hopper to be published. So, like I said, we've reached out to some of these people to collaborate with them. University of Minnesota, we really liked their group. I reached out to their authors. They're more than willing to just hand over we can plagiarize it directly if we wanted it to. If we wanted to put it out through OSU Extension, they'll give us the InDesign files and we can just basically rebrand it. But before we agreed to that, we had lots of questions about it, whether that's our role. And so, like I said, we've been kind of approaching this to create a manual of, if people come to us with a what do I do and how do I do it, when people come to us those questions, I'll say it again, this has come up already. You just phrased it perfectly, Chris. If this is already happening, it's just repackaging. I'm not really sure what the IPM BMP role is. I'm a little more confused after this. Jim addressed this earlier. We're looking at resources. They have some they like. Wyatt just said he has some resources that he likes. We've got some that we like, and we're all collecting resources. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I wanted to get out of the meeting today, was sort of clarify our role within the larger scope and identify audiences between training and comms, because there's a ton of overlap is what we're finding between the subcommittees, especially with communications and training. Are we just coming up with content? Are we vetting anything? Do we need to vet anything? These are kind of the questions. But in terms of what we've done, we've gone through and sort of approach this with we plan on producing some kind of document like the one that Minnesota is putting out, and are happy to continue doing that, borrowing from other resources. But do you guys just want us to vet content and hand it over to comms? What do you want us to do? But maybe that's a question to be answered sort of during discussion after we hear the other reports too. I'm just posing that as our question.
Yeah. Karen?
And I think this might be something more for the steering committee to consider and sort of balance between. It seems like the communications committee can get information out quickly, but a resource should be kind of codified in a published document, maybe through OSU Extension, this bigger guidance document that Chris and I have been considering how to publish. So we don't want to delay things, and they could be news releases or on the website, but then or be part of the official quarantine and compliance rules, but then brought into a more comprehensive kind of how-to document, probably published through OSU or Pacific Northwest Extension.
Rob, you have a question, Robert?
Yeah, I want to echo, I'm a former extension agent, and I think giving things the veneer of legitimacy coming out of OSU is very helpful for the public. And thinking in terms of the audiences that will receive that information and how they'll feel about it, which is as important in getting compliance or not, is important. So considering the source is critical, and I would advocate for as much public-facing information to come out of OSU. I would recommend pairing that with the official lines about quarantine and other regulatory approaches so that you have kind of a full court press. The other piece is PNW ISA is a trusted resource for many in the arborist community, and therefore your city arborists and community foresters are going to be listening to that source as well. So there may be a way to tag team both OSU and ISA as resources for those two kinds of audiences. But I think the coverage of where it comes from is as important as the content.
So should we then be sort of aiming to get a larger document out eventually? Because that was one of Karen's big question also, is like, what are our deadlines? And Max brought this up also. He's on our subcommittee. Max Ragazzino, is what do you guys need and when? And it sounds like some of those discussions are already happening. Like Jim just brought up, like we have these things going up on the website, and there's some other, wood waste things. But that's been our question too, is like, do you guys need this by December? Do you need Christine Buell needed a pesticides list? When do you guys need that? So what it sounds like is, yeah, we should continue to keep moving on a larger document, but it's not urgent. Go ahead, Jim.
So, Chris, it's apparent to me just listening to this is how much activity there is that the real risk isn't that any one person's not doing the work. It's that everyone starts to put out communication about it, and there's inconsistency because that's great. Minneapolis has something. We love it. We pushed it out quickly to get it out there to the people that we're training, we're doing. And then OSU's over here saying Michigan did a really good job. So we've got this slightly different version. Is it 140 degrees or is it 175 like in the original EAB plan? So that's who's going to check to make sure that those are all consistent. I think ultimately we'd like to have, I think Rob's point is it may be that it's OSU Forestry, College of Forestry or Extension is, got the book, the Bible, but it's also vetted by ODF and ODA and U.S. Forest Service, just like the EAB readiness plan was a joint product, right? And I think that's what we're trying to go for, is to instill a little bit of a sense of the public that everyone's kind of looked at this and there's not really a lot of daylight between agencies on what to do.
That's what we're trying to avoid also. I mean, that's what so we stopped Alex's publication, which was already put out to OSU Extension, but then that was done before there were subcommittees. So like he started writing it, sent it out, but then his decision tree of, is EAB in my county? It was like, well, wait, we don't know if that's how people are doing it. So that's already a communications problem. And, what's he telling people to do? And which audience is he addressing? Is he addressing the homeowner? Is he addressing the wood stand owner or the lumber person or a, tribal community? That was something that was like, okay, we have a lot of different audiences. He had his own audience, but that was kind of an issue too. And so, but you bring up I mean, I have exactly the same concerns about communications where it goes out with a different message, but you guys are already linking to stuff or like Wyatt's got something. So I guess that's are we collecting resources from you guys and vetting them, or are we finding our own? That's, I guess, what I'd like to clarify.
I mean, so I'll just interject. So like, I think what Wyatt was working on was specific to his group. Right. He has the wood utilization group. So you're right. We could have just omitted a wood utilization group and just included that as a part of the BMP group, and you could have come probably to the same outcome. But I think it was just, probably someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea was just to make sure that that was specifically a topic that was going to get addressed, and it was going to get addressed at the forefront, because that's something that's going to be at the primary of people. Like, we've already been getting questions about that almost since day one, right? Yeah. But I think going forward, now that we have that information, I think two things. One, that this greater booklet that you're talking about, which I think is a great idea. One, two, it could be incorporated in there, right, as a section. But would I recommend waiting for that whole development of that document before releasing that information as like a standalone, like 1 or 2 pager info guide or something? I would not recommend that because again, people want that information sooner rather than later. So I guess maybe that makes it more complicated, but I don't think we can wait for all of this to be produced all at the same time.
No, I don't think so. I think it clarifies it. And I think maybe Karen, correct me if I'm wrong. It just makes it so we've been, I think, maybe approaching it in the reverse. So like we should have been hearing what everybody else is going and collecting these informations that the different groups are doing it with the idea of doing it rather than we jumped ahead and we're like, okay, what are the states doing? Because if we were the how, then we're like, well, we don't really, because I mean, this came up in our discussions too. It's like no one's going to come to me to ask how to do wood waste, even though like, you know, we did the same research. I don't want that responsibility. Right. So that's I think we just
right. But you said that you were working on the pesticide and usage part, which is exactly the kind of thing that I think we were thinking that your group would be tackling, which it sounds like
because we brought it in, because I saw he'd already done it. So it was like, wait, let's slow it down. So okay, good. This has been great.
Yeah, no. Wyatt.
Yeah, thanks for letting me chime in. Yeah, so when we were kind of dreaming up these subcommittees, the IPM was just that. What are the nuts and bolts for pesticides in particular? Any sort of like SLAM, slow ash mortality? Just what's the latest research results? And if there was something with the mechanical, chipping and stuff like that, that you could feed into the wood waste. One thing I didn't mention about the wood waste is the whole notion of this Forest Practices Act and people wanting to get out ahead of ash or of EAB and harvest ash and replant it. So that's kind of in that realm of wood waste. I didn't mention that today, but I think the IPM, in my opinion, is just to get the latest and most up-to-date things on the pesticides, biological control, mechanical control, cultural control, all those things that go into IPM. That was just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and so I mean, and along those lines, I get that part of it too. But then, like for the biocontrol, we can have a best management practice for that. But there's already guidelines in place and specific rules, so it's not like we can recommend biocontrol because it's like it has to be 40 acres, it has to be established. So like, how do I? It's different than like another IPM approach. Like that's kind of like going into it. We've looked at it like, what did you do for normal IPM if you're a farm or something like that? And whereas this has like kind of different. It's very specific, and there's not a lot of options since there's basically.
And that's going to be done by USDA and by the state agencies. So you're right, Chris, that might not have been a good example.
That's the confusion. We're running into this almost like every single topic. So, but I think we have a clear idea. And again, Karen, if you have any comments, jump in. But that's kind of been just to report back what we've been doing. That's kind of been one of the biggest questions and one of the biggest challenges is what are we actually doing with the information that we're collecting? So, but this has been helpful.
Okay. And I think maybe that's a learning opportunity for other folks in subcommittees that when your committee kind of hits a point like that, maybe that's the time to speak out, reach out, bring that to attention to your lead so that they can bring it to the steering committee and then they can talk to each other and kind of help create some direction. Or if you feel like your group may be overlapping with another group, then reach out to the lead of that other subcommittee and say, hey, this is something we're dealing on. Are we overlapping here? Is there a way that we can collaborate? Because I'm sure this isn't the first time this is going to happen. And this will probably, it's just how it goes when you've got something that's this complicated. And we're still in figuring this out altogether. So I appreciate everyone's patience, but also there's just a lot of good ideas out there. So I think that's also part of it. So at basically 2:30, I think we're actually maybe doing better time than I thought we were. So let's move on. So we got 2 more groups. We have our training group, and I think who's on our Alex Gorman. Alex, there you are. Do you have anything for the training group that you'd like to update us on?
Oh yeah, we sure do. First want to start off. I know there are a few people who might have been able to or trying to join our subcommittee meeting early today. We were using Zoom instead of Teams, and Teams does the silly thing where it creates a Teams meeting for meetings that aren't in Teams. So if you was one of you, I will reach out. We will just stick with Teams. Also, I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but after hearing everyone and especially Chris and Wyatt talk about it, so our subcommittee is having the same issue that the IPM BMP is. You know, I'm kind of sitting here thinking, okay, are we obsolete as a subcommittee? Because if ODA, if everyone's trying to develop trainings and, you know, someone's giving a training to California and Washington and someone's giving a training to this group and this group, and we, you know, so like, same with Chris, like what is our role? Are we vetting training information? Are we creating training information? There are currently only 4 of us. So are we creating that information and also implementing that to Northern California, Oregon, and Southern Washington? That's kind of very big amorphous questions that we keep running into. Is, you know, we've had a great couple meetings about who we think where we think our target priority areas for training should be, so like Washington County and the adjacent counties, and then who we think you know, our priority level of target audiences, you know, starting from those people who are in the trees, arborists, master gardeners, all the way down to general public being kind of the least priority. But it really, I think, comes back to what clearly defined is what our role is, much like what Chris Hedstrom just said. And then also along those same lines is we would like to know either from the steering committee or kind of whoever wants to chime in on this, and Dan Stark and Skull Odenhoff, who are also on the subcommittee, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it'd be nice to know where we want trainings to go, because we can spend 2 FTEs developing training for, you know, the information we get from, let's say, wood utilization, but if the general public or the training audiences really want trainings on biocontrol, you know, we want to make sure we're going down the right rabbit hole at the right time. And like I said, we've kind of napkined out what we think appropriate trainings are at appropriate times. But again, if, you know, ODA and, you know, different subcommittees are creating different trainings to different people, that's I just want to make sure we're keeping the message consistent, because I feel like our subcommittee especially is outward facing. And so that's another thing I wanted to bring up, especially to the communications committee, is it'd be great to get some sort of, either on wherever this end all be all EAB website's going to be, it would be wonderful on that webpage to get a link or a button or something to say, you know, so if I go on there and I'm interested in training, I can click on that, I can fill out my information. And then along those same lines, I saw that each subcommittee was assigned an email, I think through Oregon Invasive Species Council. It would be great, especially for our training subcommittee, to be able to have access to that email as a one-stop, so that the 4 of us aren't trying to balance emails from all of you and from the public and from everyone else. So I see Anne has a question, so I'm going to stop talking, and Anne, go for it.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to add that I really appreciate all the work everyone's doing, and I think it's incredibly inspiring to see us all come together on this. And in regards to the wood waste and utilization, I'm still trying to track down equipment. It's a little bit harder to find extra equipment that's not being utilized or that may be extra. A lot of it's already spoken for, so just trying to work out those details. I'll get those to you soon, as well as temporary storage locations, working with our land use regulations to figure out where that would be okay. And then in regards to the training, I know that there's some other trainings that have taken place, which is great. I understand there's, you know, really good turnout for our maintenance vegetation crews. The time commitment for those trainings was just not going to work out with the operations we have going on. So I actually ended up developing a training based on the same resources that we're all discussing. So I don't know if that's helpful to the training committee. I'm happy to send out the training I put together, just so we can combine resources.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Ann. It's fantastic. And kind of similar thing with what Jim was saying is, you know, if our role is just to vet the trainings that you all come up with for your individual audiences, we you know, I suppose we can do that, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel 150 times. But we also want to make sure that at the very least we're made aware of what trainings are happening, so we don't, you know, so I in my role as an extension forester am not reaching out and trying to like, you know, train people who've already been trained.
Yeah.
And it would also, it's very important that we keep track of the numbers of who we are training, so we can take those numbers to the state, and I can take those numbers to my boss and say, like, you know, this has been worth a 75% FTE, because we've trained 2,000 people. So Dan, you got a question? Something to say? Dan is also on the subcommittee with OSU Extension.
Yeah, hi everybody, and yeah, this is my first meeting to attend, and yeah, we just met the subcommittee early this morning, so it's nice to meet you all. I'm an Oregon State Extension agent on the North Coast in Clatsop, Tillamook, and Lincoln counties, and I've also run the Oregon Forest Pest Detector program that was handed to me after Amy Grotta's unfortunate passing, and Alex is a big partner in that, as of all of you. That's one thing that did come up, you know, for us. I just wanted to share what Alex just said too. It would be nice if our subcommittees could be treated as the hub for everything that we're doing. Communications, we direct it to there. We each have our own, but we have to engage these subcommittees, it seems, from being new to this group. And just for that very point that Alex just mentioned is, you know, we need to keep our hands on who's being reached out to. For example, at our previous meeting this morning, it came up that we have this, you know, ISA group that would be wonderful to reach out to because they get all this information. So I'm hearing that someone else is already kind of doing that. So I think it would do this. I think it would be worthwhile to make sure that we are clear with our roles and responsibilities of each of these subcommittees and what it is that we're supposed to do and how the rest of this group is how they're supposed to interact with those groups. Otherwise, we're just going to be doing everything that we're trying to avoid, communicating here, doing this and doing that, and it's going to be impossible. That's where my brain goes. So anything extension could help and carry that along and to help facilitate that process would be happy to help out in that.
Okay, 2 more comments. Robert, you were first, and then we'll go to Jim.
Just real quick, I feel like steering, we need to meet soon and probably talk about scope with each of the committee leads and identify like what's the highest priority scope items. I mean, Jim and Cody and Wyatt, others have identified those, but we have at least 2 teams where scope is in question. And it feels like this is center field for steering to really dive into the response plan, which has some of that outlined, look at some other state responses, and play center field on these things. That's it for me.
So that is the point of the steering committee, is to help when these sorts of issues come up. But we need to hear from the subcommittees first before we can come to the conclusion that, okay, we need to gather and have that discussion. So you're right on point, Robert, for sure. Addressing the concern of the subcommittee for training, I will admit that when we created these subcommittees, I thought the intention was that was the purpose of the subcommittee, the training subcommittee, was that to create training opportunities for various audiences. However, it does seem that is the problem, is that there are multiple groups that are all doing their individual trainings. So I hear you on that, and that is going to be a problem, and we do need to kind of figure out a way of how to keep people in their shop, so to speak, and also a better way to kind of encourage cross-pollination between the groups and communication. But I will touch on one thing about, again, I've said this before, about the biocontrol in particular. That really is a specific function that's happening at ODA with the support of USDA. That's really not going to pop into any other group, really, because that has very specific parameters. We have specific funding for that. So if there is training that's happening, the reason it's coming from ODA or coming from USDA is because of the framework of which that's being created. So that's not something that we're going to pass on to OSU, for example, to do that training, and that's not something that another group is going to do. So I just wanted to be clear that that is kind of like the one little, I think, example, like
Chris, I
exception to
want
that.
to reinforce that too. I think what you're getting at is that there's two audiences here. There's the primary audience around Ground Zero, Forest Grove, and those industry leaders that are actually taking our preliminary data right now. And I think that's where the disposal committee and the survey committee are really kind of going after right now. And I think what we might need to talk about is these other subcommittees working with, is there another audience that's maybe a larger audience? In my mind, I'm thinking of like master gardeners, first detectors, people who are on the ground who might not have as much of a stake in Ground Zero, but have a larger, more peripheral purview. And I think that's where I'm kind of seeing someone like Alex Gorman's group kind of working on some of these other larger, more public groups. But I get that's arbitrary. And again, that's where it's always going to be tough to parse these groups out. But I want to reinforce what you're saying there, because I do think there are two different audiences that we're kind of already getting after.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And then
Chris and Cody, thanks. And I also want to throw out, so Dan and I, especially in our work as extension, deal heavily with both of those groups.
Right.
And I will tell you and Dan, feel free to correct me or back me up, from both of those groups, no one cares about I can't spray until the spring, or that adults don't fly until the spring. They want to know what they can use with their ash right now. They want to do, they just, so it's we have, especially with extension, have that fine line between saying, please hold on while the people who are experts get this stuff together, and then giving people actual valid information that they can use, even if it's just a little something to make them feel like they've been seen and heard. So in those things where the training subcommittee won't be delivering or creating trainings because it's really outside of our purview, it would be wonderful to get a fact sheet or something that we can say, hey, we're not going to have a training on this, but this is just a little, as much or as little as you want to put on it, to be like, yep, because I can also tell you that one of the most common questions I get is biocontrol. Like, are these wasps going to come kill my kids? And I'd be like, no, they're super tiny, it won't do anything. So just something to think about as we're moving forward is, keep that public viewpoint in mind, and practitioner viewpoint as well. Not to mention the miscommunication that's going on, but that's another story.
Jim, your cat is getting increasingly impatient.
She is. Yeah, I agreed with Dan and Alex's earlier comments. I think one thing to keep in mind is that over time, this is a marathon, so every county eventually will be a ground zero of its own, right? So right now, it's very easy because there's Forest Grove and there's kind of a discrete group of people we're dealing with, like Rob's group and Tualatin and whatever. But what happens when it moves to Yamhill, and now you get a whole other set of characters? So to the degree that we're thinking about trainings and others, it may be easy to do that centralized at the beginning. OSU Forestry, fortunately, is all over the state, so they're in a good position to offer trainings and learn from one county extension agent to the other, So we might want to think about this in terms of that longer term. Will there need to be a case of maybe the training committees empowering trainings? Here's sort of what's been vetted. Here's a sheet if you need it. Here's a training module if you need it. We're going to provide it through OSU Extension where we can have the capacity, but others who might want to do that, say in an urban forestry environment where OSU Forestry Extension maybe not quite as plugged in, or a soil and water conservation group gets together and does it. I think a lot of people are probably going to end up doing trainings over the long haul. And what we want, I think, in the steering group is a sense of, are those trainings consistent with each other? That's more, I think, where we in communications are like, can we kind of stand behind whether it's a Umatilla County extension agent, or is it somebody from the city of Eugene communicating, to arborists in the city of Eugene? That would be, I think, where the common goal is. Yeah, you can take what Alex and that training committee developed in 2022, and we'll update it periodically as needed, but that's pretty much solid stuff. And if you want to do your own training, God bless you. You've got capacity and you're using your local funds to reach the 7 people on that neighborhood association, then go do it. All right.
Yeah, that's
we're at,
awesome, Jim.
great. Okay, Dan, you still have your hand up. Do you have another comment? Good. All right. Hands down.
I will say one quick update. Last one.
Oh, sure.
I know I
Okay.
don't want to be the guy that was like, we're over time. To go off of what Jim was saying, we've already been talking about kind of that forward thinking, developing train the trainer programs for our OSU extension agents, and then also how can we package a train the trainer program of, kits and trainings that are boilerplate that can be updated and be like, here you go, City of Eugene, have fun. Let us know if you have questions. So yes, I'd love to hear that, and it's already kind of been popping around our brain. So I'd love to hear that someone else is saying that too.
Great. Okay. So we're gonna move on from that topic, but thank you everyone for that. So last, but I guess maybe least, maybe not least, I'm on the agenda for update for funding. So really I just want to give folks update for what ODA's done for the funding efforts. So far, hold on, I have a couple slides really quick. I like slides. Sorry, it helps me stay on point for what I'm talking about. Use that up. So we have we've put forward a e-board request. So just for folks who aren't kind of familiar with what e-board is, it just stands for emergency board. So basically when, every biennium, the state, all agencies, ODF, ODA, DEQ, all of them have the opportunity to put forward their budget asks to the governor's office for creating new positions or additional funding for programs, creating new programs and the like. But what we're trying to ask for funding outside of that window, then we have to appeal to what's called the emergency board. And so because EAB came online really after the agency was well progressed with our budget development and what we call our budget asks and position asks, we had to go to the e-board and kind of propose a budget for that monetary ask. So hopefully this is big enough. I can get rid of this sideboard there. So together asking for a total of 450,000, excuse me, 550,000. So in this slide, I just kind of outlined breaking it down to what we were looking at. And I do want to stress that with this September e-board meeting that's coming up next week, these are funds that would become available this fall, but are only really, it's just covering the end of this biennium. So the biennium ends at the end of June of 2023. So it's roughly about 7 or 8 months worth of time for usage of these funds. So a lot of this is focusing on for like ODA's need, but in part also trying to supplement needs that we already know that we're anticipating, I should say, that we're gonna come online. So again, over the winter, we've talked about this, I think today already, that surveys will continue through the winter. So we're looking for funding to supply additional 4 technicians that will help our existing staff for surveys. We do have an outreach coordinator, but I'd like to be able to dedicate at least about a third of their time to, again, help with the ODA's outreach efforts, and likewise a dedicated response coordinator. So we don't have a full-fledged standalone EAB program at ODA. Everyone's wearing multiple hats and is participating in multiple projects and surveys across the state. But if we could have one person who was kind of keeping an eye on the EAB efforts, that would really help us in our capacity. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a permanent position. This is a limited duration position, meaning that it's temporary. So once these funds are used up or end by June of 2023, would then have to go back to the e-board again and appeal for additional funding to continue that position. That's not ideal, but that's just the framework that we have to work in. Going off of that, just money for supporting staff. And this is kind of what kind of appeals to the greater community. So in part is for tree felling. Again, as part of those surveys that happen in the winter, some of those trees we will need to fell. So talking with our biocontrol specialists in that group, we can see what's happening in a tree and looking for galleries and exit holes on the trunk that's, as tall as we are that we can see. But, a lot of times what we really need to see in the canopy is well beyond our reach. So we need to fell those trees to be able to look and see if we can see symptoms on the upper part of the canopy, in addition to peeling bark of trees to see galleries, which is easier to do once the trees are felled. Green waste collection, we've talked a lot about green waste removal, but that doesn't come for free. That's another lesson we've learned from JB, that we, and by we meaning this ODA, we pay a significant cost for those collection areas, and we have to make contracts for those, so we need funds for that. And treatments. People are already asking a lot about treatments. 60,000 isn't a lot, but again, that's just an initial. We could not have any idea of what to anticipate, how many trees we would be treating. And this isn't going to be a silver bullet where we can inject every tree that we come across. So again, this would be for targeted trees, people who may have heritage trees, or ones that we feel are in particular cases that are warrant trying to save. So again, if we get this, if we are awarded these funds, they would need to be used by the end of June 2023. So just really quickly, what does that timeline look like? So we submitted this request formally already back in August. The next session for coming to hearing is next week in what we call legislative days. So really that just is the opportunity for us to be on the agenda for the committee. Most likely it will be the Natural Resources Committee. We just present our ask to the committee. It gives them an opportunity to ask us questions. Typically those questions evolve around like reiterating what is the exact need for the funds, how will they be used, how do they benefit not just ODA, but the greater affected community. And then if approved, that goes on to the fuller, greater Ways and Means Committee, which is put in task of reviewing all of these asks that come from, you know, various organizations. And these move pretty quickly. So it could be as early as probably anticipate by the end of next week, we will know for sure if we get these funds. The director's office at ODA is rather confident that we will, but nothing's ever said and done until you get the formal approval. So barring all that goes as we anticipate, we can expect to see that funding roll in probably mid-October. It could be November. So that's my update that I have on that, and I'm open to questions if anybody has any. Karen Ripley is also on our funding committee. I don't know if she had anything that she'd like to share with the group.
Yeah, my camera was slow in getting started, but the Forest Service has already committed $75,000 in year-end funds to the Oregon Department of Forestry to support a coordinator in its urban and community forestry program, because a lot of Emerald Ash Borer is urban issues. ODF is also supporting 25% of that position and will support 75%. We have $75,000 that we could use to support ODA and the Oregon Invasive Species Council for their Emerald Ash Borer needs. We need to obligate that probably next month. And so maybe as this e-board request comes through, if there are other gaps or other things that could supplement it, we just need to establish the details. If there's not a need for it, we could probably send it towards the Washington State Urban and Community Forestry Program, because that's sort of the next domino that's going to fall. But our priority is to support ODA and the Oregon Invasive Species Council. We've just received another $70,000 from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that's available for Emerald Ash Borer response. And we haven't given a lot of thought to how or who that funding will be directed to. And these infrastructure laws come with a lot of extra administrative requirements for regular reporting. And it's just a sort of extra administrative deal. So we want to be deliberate, and whoever we give it to needs to be mentally prepared and administratively prepared that there's big workload with this stuff. But it is, 70,000 is nothing to sneeze at. That can buy a lot of good stuff. So that's where we are. 70,000 to be determined, 75 already to ODF, 75 intended for ODA and OISC.
Thank you, Karen and Chris. I think we're running right on our 3 o'clock adjournment here. Were there any questions for Chris or Karen?
Well, Adam
Looks like Adam's
Coble.
got a question.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Adam. Thank you.
Yeah, not so much a question, but related to that bipartisan infrastructure law funds. So as I understand, Karen, we're through Cooperative Forest Health Grant, we're getting $333,000 a year for forest health, an additional $333,000 for urban and community forestry. And so our plan, we're working on a budget for that now to cover, I believe, 3 natural resource specialist positions focused on emerald ash borer and a forest management tech. And then a lot of those funds will be used for contractual funds too. So Scott Altenhoff and myself are currently working on the budget for that. But those are some additional funds that, you know, we can use towards EAB.
Thank you, Adam. Alex Gorman.
Yeah, my camera also is taking a second to start up, but any for the funding, has there been any look at funding opportunities for training and technical assistance? That would go, any would go a lot really far, especially for purchasing materials and potentially a coordinator. Don't need an answer right now, just wanted to kind of throw that out.
Anybody have any quick reactions to that?
This is Jake from USDA. It does look like somebody submitted a proposal on PPA 7721. I don't remember if that was Alex.
That was Alex,
that.
Chris, Dan, and I, yeah.
So I know we've already provided feedback on that on the internal review, and it's going through that review process. So that's one avenue y'all put forward for additional resources for training and going through that.
Okay, just a couple, a few next steps. We are scheduled for another one of these meetings, October 11th at 1 p.m. So we'll encourage all the committees to keep meeting and report back on your updates next month. Next week, during the legislative hearings, the Invasive Species Council will be doing a kind of a reintroduction panel to the House Agriculture Committee. Wednesday, sometime between 2:30 and 5 p.m. A very brief portion of that will be a quick update about EAB to the committee. It's going to be mostly a summary of what we've covered in here. So we're working with some folks to get on that panel and join folks from the council. So just in case you are paying attention to the legislative hearings, that will be popping up on that committee. Any other items for the good of the order before we adjourn? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So thank you everybody for your time today and all of your work, especially those leading the committees. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to support you guys. Please keep sending me your emails to get on all the various teams and channels and all that fun stuff. We'll try to keep that organized. And then Jim, I'll get Gersbach, I'll get with you on trying to get our website together as well. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Great. Thanks all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.